Australian reds are full of fruit and ripeness. Who could imagine a world without classic Australian Shiraz? Wine writer Jeremy Oliver explores our popular Aussie reds and introduces some lesser-known varieties that are making their mark.
Australian Shiraz, it's the taste the rest of the world is trying to get. It's rich, it's round, it's generous, it's spicy, it's deeply flavoured. And from our warmer areas in South Australia and Western Australia, it's typically succulent and round, very, very approachable. Whereas from our cooler parts in Victoria, Western Australia and parts of South Australia, it creates a leaner, spicier, peppery and more savoury wine. Most of all, they're all very different and they're all very delicious. Grenache has been grown in Australia for well over a century, especially the old dry-grown vineyards in the Barossa Valley and McLaren Vale regions of South Australia. And here they make wines that are deeply scented and perfumed with aromas of blackberries, mulberries, blueberries, violets, plums and currants, and they have a wonderful, wonderful length of flavour that is wrapped in the most velvet smooth and tight-knit of tannins. The wines themselves drink wonderfully when young, but just you wait and see what happens after a few years in the cellar. Cabernet Sauvignon is a really important grape variety for Australians. It's grown pretty well wherever wine is grown in this country, from the west all the way through to South Australia, eastern states. And Australian Cabernet Sauvignon tends to share an intensity and brightness of lively blackcurrant, mulberry, plum flavours. These flavours are then wrapped in firm but generally fine-grained tannins that give the wine texture and richness in its youth, but also help it cellar for many a decade. Merlot is a relatively recent introduction to Australian viticulture and winemaking. Principally, it's used to flesh out and make more generous the middle palate of a lot of Cabernet-based wines. But these days we see an increasing number of straight varietal Merlots. Largely speaking, these wines have generous, ripe middle palates. They're full of blackberries, dark cherries, plums and mulberry-like flavours. And they're given soft tannins and soft oak, so they're most enjoyable to drink generally in their youth. One of the most surprising things about Australian wine is the extent to which Pinot Noir is so important here. Our best vineyards for Pinot typically come from our cooler wine regions in Victoria, Tasmania, and even into South Australia and Western Australia. The wines capture the fullness of flavour, but the elegance and freshness and vitality of the variety, with all the perfume and aroma, yet the silkiness, smoothness and sweetness on the palate that you look for in great Pinot Noir. Why don't you give them a try? Ever since it began more than 2 centuries ago, Australian wine has prided itself on being innovative and creative. One of its most extraordinary innovations has been the development of its own sparkling red wine, usually made from Shiraz, but often with Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot or even Pinot Noir. Of the 50-plus varieties used today to make Australian table wine, we now see varieties such as Barbera, Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, Dolcetto, even Tempranillo and Zinfandel. The challenge facing the growers and makers of these wines is to try and locate the precise sites where these different varieties can best express what makes them different and distinctive.